Thank you for joining us on the Going Deeper podcast, a ministry of Fathom Church in Littleton, Colorado. You will never get to the bottom of the depths that are in Christ for you. And our hope with this podcast is that it will help you go deeper with God. So let's dive in to this episode of the Going Deeper podcast. What's up, church? This is your host, Kyle Knight, and welcome to the Going Deeper podcast, a podcast where we have conversations to hopefully help you go deeper in your relationship with God. Thank you for listening. I'm in the podcast studio with Karina Bost, our missions and events minister.
Hello.
Hi, Karina. And Chris Martin.
Buenos dias.
Well, we've gone Spanish again.
International. It's a cross-cultural experience here in the Fathom podcast studio.
I've missed that.
Hey guys, so we're not recording this when this will be released, but this will be released the first week of March, I believe. Okay. And March is when life starts to perk up a little bit in my mind. I call January and February the dark months. But March, it's also my birthday month, so that helps. That helps. But this is my question. This is my question. When do you start shifting out of winter mode into spring mode?
March 20th, right? Birthday.
I expect gifts galore. When the gifts start showing up, that's when
Yeah.
Like, what is it? Like, is it a smell? Like sometimes for me, the smell outside.
We did this.
I know we did this with fall, but but fall is like, oh, we're moving into nostalgic times. Now we're moving into like warmth and light and pools
more snow.
Isn't that the thing in Colorado? It's like all these false.
Hey, I'm trying to bring a hopeful edge here.
I'm just bringing it down because it's just more snow. It's the snowiest months. It's terrible.
I feel like March and April are the snowiest months. So you're like ready for warmth, which is actually, it's not fair because we do get some really warm days, but then it's like interrupted with snow. But I love to see the trees budding. I don't think there's anything. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful things you see in town is when the spring trees start to.
All right, I hate you guys.
No, hold on.
I hate you guys. Let's move. Nope. That's it. Worst banter question ever. Let's talk about mentoring.
I'm going to answer this.
All right.
First of all, I don't like snow. But
spring, we get it.
Yeah. But okay, so spring snows. I like spring snows when they're melting. But I like when it's like your grass finally, I mean, we're lawn mowing.
Yeah, when the grass starts poking through.
The grass and there is some snow, but it's nice and warm out. And so, but you can see that green grass coming alive.
How awesome is it on a spring snow when the pavement is so hot that you start to see the steam, like a steamy snow? That's rad.
Yeah, well, it's nice because unless it's a really big snow, you don't really have to shovel because it snows and it melts right away.
That's right.
So yeah, there's a lot of good redeeming qualities.
Sure, whatever, dude.
Spring and Chris Martin's birthday.
Yeah. Why don't we just transition?
Yeah. We're talking mentoring in this episode. Something that, man, I believe is needed, but I feel like maybe in the Christian community, in church, sometimes can be overlooked, but also can be practiced, but maybe not. I don't know. Maybe not. Like, I don't know, out in the open, I guess, or kind of just some people have mentor relationships, some people don't. So it's kind of a little bit of a confusing thing, but we want to talk about mentoring. So Chris, I want to throw this one out to you first. What is biblical mentoring? Like, what is, you could talk about mentoring in general because there can be like non-Christian mentoring, but we're talking here about what does the Bible say about mentoring? What does a mentoring relationship look like for a Christian?
All right. So this is, the Bible doesn't use the word mentor to my knowledge. I'm trying to think. I don't think so.
I don't think so.
The Bible would use the word disciple, right? So, I mean, mentoring is kind of a modern version of that, but discipling is really just one Christian who has some experience or maturity or depth that's a little bit further along than another Christian. And that first Christian, let's call them the mentor, encouraging, sharing, coaching, walking with that younger Christian to help them.
You can call them the mentee.
Mature, the mentee, you might say. So yeah, I mean, biblically, we see this. I mean, in tons of different places, but maybe the one that I want to point out specifically is Paul and Timothy. I think this one comes to mind pretty quickly, where older, wiser, more mature Paul, the Apostle Paul, takes under his wing this young guy, Timothy, and writes him letters, and they go on missionary journeys together. And Timothy becomes a pastor and an elder in the church of Ephesus. And Paul is encouraging him and writing to him. And we even find some of Timothy's biographical data from Paul, where he talks about him being raised with a Gentile father and a Jewish mother, or grandmother Eunice, who, shared the faith with him. I mean, all this stuff is really interesting. But you see this guy, and there's an age difference in this one. I don't think there always has to be an age difference when it comes to mentoring.
I got some of those questions coming.
Yeah,
up,
but I think that's the thing, is like Paul is further along in his journey. Timothy is newer in his journey, and you see Timothy gleaning great wisdom from Paul. Paul is intentional in pouring into Timothy, and we are to assume that Timothy is intentional in following after Paul. So it's this two-way street of mentor and mentee, of discipler and disciple.
Karina, what are your first thoughts on when you hear mentoring?
Yeah, well, I had the example of Paul and Timothy as well, but I also had Jesus and the disciples.
Right.
You can see that that's a pretty clear story throughout the Gospels. And it's kind of the same, that Jesus pursued the disciples and that they chose to follow him. So that was a thought that I had, that it was a two-way street, and that they were really living life together, and Jesus was pouring information, not just knowledge, but through experience and through like a living example to his disciples. And so it's not necessarily, he wasn't just giving them all the answers. He was living his life and like being a living example of what it was to be godly.
So why is it important to have a mentor or to seek that out instead of, I mean, we hear a lot of the times that, your Christian life, your this whole sanctification process, what we're going through and following Jesus with our lives, that this, you can't do this alone, you do this with other people. But what, like, mentoring specifically, why is it super important, or is it super important to have a mentor, or can you kind of do this, just with your church? Does this have to be a super formal thing, like, you are my mentor? Yes, I am your mentor now. I know, see Chris flipping open the Bible, so let's hear it.
So I think, and I'm trying to find a text, but I didn't have time because you cut me off in my searching. But so like, why would we do this as opposed to just study your Bible by yourself, read books by yourself, go get a Christian degree by yourself, listen to more sermons, listen to podcasts? Like, why would we do this? Well, one reason is we talk about Christian community on this podcast all the time, that like life together matters. But I think beyond just the model that Jesus shows us, which is, a teacher and a student, kind of a mentor and a mentee, beyond that, that's how we do all things in life. Like, it's built into the fabric of creation. This is why little infant children learn so much by just observing the adults that care for them. So parent to child relationships, children imitate, right? And that's the language that Paul uses. Imitate me as I imitate Christ. So like, built into the fabric of not only our discipleship, but all learning is not just a dissemination of information. It's not like, remember the first Matrix, where it's just like plug them in and like, I know Kung Fu, right? Like that whole,
which is so sweet,
which would be rad. But it's also, it is founded on a premise that experience is not a part of learning. But experience is always a part of learning, right? It's not just, let me just crack open, Karina's skull and somehow like implant information into her brain. So, and this is actually something that like social psychologists are talking about right now. Even science is talking about, okay, as we move closer and closer towards the ability to genuinely like upload information into human brains. Like when we talk about implants and things like that, there's all this talk about like, what if we could legitimately implant the Bible into your brain so that you had the whole thing in your brain? Like as we move closer and closer to artificial intelligence, these are like real conversations that people are having about the future of science and humanity kind of colliding, of technology and humanity kind of starting to merge. But here's the premise that I have. Even if you had the entire Bible in a USB drive shoved into your brain and you could access it at all times, however you want to, that does not produce wisdom. That doesn't produce experience. So it's not just about the data. It's about the experience. And that's why I think mentoring or discipling is such a foundational piece. Because if it was just as easy as learn the facts, man, we wouldn't have issues with the morals that we do when it comes to professors, pastors, I mean, like longtime Christians who have moral failures, who have like, who know the book and are not putting it into practice. That's where mentoring comes in. That's where accountability comes in. So my answer to your question is, I can't even imagine a world, even in science fiction, where it's just a matter of you just plug it in, process it without really seeing someone model it and then you imitate it. So that's my thought.
Yeah, that's a good thought. Thank you. So I want to throw this out there because I mean, Chris, you've mentioned a few times about age and all this other kind of stuff. And we'll get to, I would love to know people's experience with mentoring, good, bad, all that kind of stuff. But I'd love to just know, what are your thoughts on who can be a mentor? Like we talked about age. Does it have to be like, what does that relationship sort of look like? Does it have to be someone older mentoring somebody younger? What does like spiritual maturity have to do with it? Age have to do with it? Should someone who's in their 80s be still looking for someone a few years older than them to be a mentor, or are they now called to be a mentor to somebody else? Like what does that relationship kind of look like with age, place in life, all that kind of stuff? What are you guys' thoughts on it? Who can be a mentor?
You want to go first? You want me to try this?
Let's hear it, Chris.
Okay. I think age does play a part in it. Okay. I mean, I just think we would be foolish to say it doesn't. But that age always correlates with experience and maturity, right? So on a real general plane, if you've been alive longer, you've experienced more and have matured more. Now, that's not always the case. That is not always the case. Just because you see an old guy or an old gal in our church does not mean that they would be a perfect mentor for you. It does not only have to do with age, but I certainly think it should play into that. But that does not necessarily mean that if you are under the age of 40, you should not mentor. And if you are over the age of 40, you should mentor. Because I think a college student can mentor a high school student. I think a senior in college can mentor a freshman in college. I think a 30-something mom can mentor a 20-something mom. And, oh, by the way, I sometimes think that a 20-something dad can mentor a 40-something dad. So I think that it's not a universal fact, but I just say probably a good rule of thumb is start by looking up if you're looking for a mentor. That's probably the right first direction to look. But then I would begin to say, maybe not everybody can be a mentor, but almost everybody can be a mentor at some level. Like almost everybody can find somebody who's a couple steps behind them in some way. And everybody probably can be mentored a mentee, right? Like even if you're in your 80s, golly, I hope I still have relationships with people who are calling me to deeper places with Jesus. And listen, it might be that as you get into your 70s, into your 80s, into your Lord is gracious, into your 90s, it may not be somebody who is older than you age-wise. But gosh, man, I hope I'm humble enough to want to learn and to want to grow and to want to be challenged by people who are further along in different disciplines than I am. So I think age has some merit there. But I think it's more looking for somebody who's further along in an area that you want to progress in. There's my 2 cents.
Yeah. I think I kind of just think back to my own personal experience, and one of the most impactful was someone who was ahead of me in being a mother and a wife. And I mean, they happened to be a little bit older than me. But it was actually Kathy Bushman. I don't know if you know Kathy Bushman, but she came into my life when I was really, really young, just married. And I look back to just how she poured into my life, it wasn't just like this pouring in of wisdom. It was just living life together. Yeah. It was like, hey, it's a Wednesday, I'm doing laundry, but come over. Oh, you're doing laundry tomorrow? I'll come over. We'll do laundry. And our kids just played together. And it was just through kind of like you were saying, watching her just be a mom and a wife was way more impactful than just sitting down. Hey, let's talk about how to be a godly mom and wife. And
let's read this book together.
Exactly. Which I think there can be value in that. But I think in that stage of my life, it was just that time and just seeing real life unfold for her and realizing and watching her do it in a godly way that just was impactful for me.
One of the things about mentoring that I feel like I hear a lot is like, how do I find a mentor? Especially in a church. Like, I feel like there's a lot of people that are going like, I want a mentor, but I have no idea. I don't know how to ask someone to be my mentor. I don't know if that's like a weird thing. Like, what if they say no? What if they're like, I just can't do this? So maybe in your guys' experience, how do we go about doing that? If we're like, man, I really do want that person in my life to pour into me, that I can watch, that I can learn from. Like in a maybe it's at our church, in a church setting. Like, what does that look like about how to actually go through that process? The first step to take. How do you reach out to someone? How do you approach someone to ask them to be your mentor? Is it as easy as, dude, you want to be my mentor?
Yeah. So I think that, so actually I do think there's work to be done before that. First of all, if you're not involved, we're talking to Fathom here. If you're not in a small group, a D group or a Bible study, you need to start there. I mean, I would not suggest you just go up to some random person on a Sunday morning who maybe you've seen do like greeting or announcements or what, and just assume, oh, I should just go up and ask that guy or that gal to be my mentor. I think it's better for you to walk with some people, whether it's in a women's Bible study, a men's Bible study, a small group, D group, whatever it might be, and begin to be like, oh, okay. Well, we've got some college students in our D group and they're walking and Karina's there. It's like, oh, as I watch Karina lead my D group, hey, maybe she would actually want to mentor me. Like that's, so I think your pre-work before you actually go and, pursue a mentor is, goodness gracious, to like get yourself out there. I mean, you're talking about like intimate discipling relationship that you shouldn't be flippant about.
Get yourself out there and get to know the person that you're actually like. This probably shouldn't be like you're in a small group too, but hey, that one person that I see and never talk to, I want to go for that person. So
so like do some work. Then step 2, get to know that person. Like it's not the quick conversation at the end of D group. Hey, would you consider mentoring me? Right? It's probably not that. It's probably not like in the hallway after church being like, oh, Gary Shearer, would you mentor me? I think it's pursue them, Hey, can I buy you lunch sometime? I want to hear your story. Hey, can we go for a walk sometime? I just love to, get to know you better. spend a little time getting to know one another. I think there's a relational aspect to mentoring that's really important. I mean, Karina has already mentioned this, that like, golly, mentoring is not just sit down and read a book together. It's like life. It's doing that. At least the best mentoring relationships I've been a part of, that's what it's been like. So I think you start by getting yourself out there. The second probably step that I would say is start to pursue somebody relationally to see if it's even a good fit. And then I think you do have to ask. Like, I think it comes to the point where you say, hey, would you pour into me? Would you mentor me? Would you? And then at that point, you guys can have a conversation about what do you mean? What's the expectation? I mean, there's a lot then that goes into that, where it's like, do you want to read books together? Do you want this to be like, do we do a Bible study together? Is it just you're talking about your life and I'm kind of giving my input on your life? Is that what you're looking like? What are you looking for? Those are the things that I think you start to process out before you enter into a mentoring relationship. And then I always think it's best to be really clear about potential revisiting an end date. So like, hey, let's do this for 6 months. And if it's just not working, we can both back out, right? I always think it's just wiser to not lock yourself in with no definite end date. Give yourself like a trial period because it may be that this mentorship will last for a decade. I have some of those. And it may be that it's like, hey, for 3 or 6 or 9 months, it was really helpful, but it kind of played itself out. That's okay too. It's just like friendship. When we talked about friendship, sometimes you're going to have seasonal friends and sometimes you're going to have lifers. And it's just a lot harder to know what a lifer is until they are there. So those would be my thoughts. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think, well, I just think back to myself, most of the time they've happened more organic. It wasn't like I sat down with someone and I was like, hey, will you be my mentor? It was definitely more someone who was already part of my life, someone who was already intentionally pouring into me. I would say I look at people as mentors and there was never that formal conversation of like, hey, will you mentor me?
Yeah.
So maybe if that was like the conversation that was had, you can have clearer expectations of what you expect in the relationship mentorship. But otherwise, I feel like the organic method seems more natural. I feel like now we're in this point where everyone, it's like a buzzword, right? Mentorship, and everyone wants to jump in on it, but it's relational and you can't just force relationship into a box.
It used to be called friends, right? Like, but I mean, so let's talk about the disciple thing for a second. You know, a rabbi would, have potential disciples who would be kind of like following around and trying to, win the favor of a rabbi. And they would just follow them and they would just listen and they would sit and they would talk. And if a rabbi wanted to bring a student on officially, the rabbi would say, come follow me. Right. And that was a huge honor. But I think it wasn't like, sometimes that's a weird thing too, is people are like, oh, I want a mentor. And then they don't do the due diligence of just kind of following around after some people for a while. But I also think sometimes people who could be potential mentors don't extend the invitation. And I think when both happen, that's when it's a real sweet thing. So here's maybe the encouragement to potential mentors. Keep your eyes open. Right? So like the Kathy Bushman thing is, she pursued you, right? And that's a huge deal. That's a huge deal because it's got to go both ways. It has to be reciprocal. It's not the mentee setting up everything and then the mentor is just kind of like, there is the sage of wisdom. It's two-way street. And so, yeah, it can be formal or it can be informal. Either way, you got to get out there, right? Like make some friends, go out to lunches, embed yourself into the lives of other people. Cause no matter what, that's the starting place. Yeah. If you're coming in cold and you're just like, I'm here to find a mentor, you come like your first week at Fathom and you're like, I'm here to find a mentor. And it's like, who are you? How about your name first?
Fill out a contact.
Right. Yeah. Connect card, please.
And we can get to know you. I think a few things that I want to touch on, Chris, that you said, expectations. Yes. Those are important, but I also, the last thing you said about which almost was like foreign to me when I heard it, but it totally makes sense of have an end date. I think it's okay to be like, hey, we're going to let's try this for a season. Because I do think when you say mentoring, it becomes a very, I feel like that word is like it's a big deal, because it is. It's like a big deal. It's a big commitment that you're whether you're pouring into somebody else or you're learning from somebody, you're studying them, whatever it is. I do feel like it can be sort of an overwhelming sort of commitment thing that it's like, and I think sometimes it doesn't work out. And I think that's okay to say like, hey, it's been 6 months or whatever, like, how are you doing? And sometimes it doesn't necessarily, like, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect that you have that mentor. I think you said for like your whole life. Sometimes there's seasons of different mentors. I think that's okay.
Right. So I think we're talking about specifically formal mentorship here. So I think Karina brought up that really important, there's a distinction here,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes you fall into mentorship through friendship, relationship, discipleship, all that stuff. If you are in a more formal process of trying to find somebody to pour into you, which I think is in vogue, so I think that's going to happen some, I think it's just really wise to, sign a prenup. And I mean, I think it's okay. The reality is it's the same. We say this with D groups too. Not every D group is going to fit. Like, there's chemistry. And sometimes, I mean, you can be with a bunch of great people and there's zero chemistry. And it's just like, why isn't this working? And there's no reason other than we just didn't work. And then other times, like the first time you're together, it's like we lock in and our conversation is deep and rich. And we're like, we're all best friends, right? And how do you program that? You can't. And the same is true, I think, with mentoring. Like, sometimes you just find somebody who is a kindred spirit and you can just lock right in and sink right in. And then other times it's a bit of a struggle. And so I just think it's wise to, be intentional with this. Although I'm going to double down on what Karina said. I think it's better if it's an informal thing. I think I've had formal mentorships and I've had informal mentorships. And sometimes the formal ones feel forced. And the informal ones just feel like godly friendships. But now here's where I'll push back on the godly friendship thing. It can also turn into a bit of an apathetic relationship if we're not careful. So I think some intentionality around, hey, are we like iron sharpening iron, pushing one another towards deeper discipleship with Jesus? And so I do think that even in an informal relationship or mentorship, you can intentionalize some of your conversations to say, hey, what if we intentionally asked these questions? Or what if we intentionally worked through this Bible study? Or what if we just read through the Gospel of John together and talked about it? Like, you could do some intentional things in an informal relationship that will bring some even maybe more fruit from that relationship. I don't know.
Yeah. And I wanted to put this out there and get your guys' thoughts on it and some experiences. I'd love to know, and maybe just pretty quickly, some good mentoring experiences that you had, whether you were the mentor or the mentee, and what was maybe some things that were good about it, some attributes of that relationship, and maybe if anybody's had any bad experiences with mentorship, like what just didn't really go well. I will start. One of the things, Pastor Chris, you were just kind of mentioning with forced mentoring. I think maybe one of the bad experiences that I had, or maybe not so great, it wasn't really bad, but not so great experiences with mentorship was, I feel like, more of a forced mentorship. And that was just my experience in seminary. When like one of our classes, we had to have mentors. And at that point in my life, I didn't have a formal mentor. And so I was seeking them out. And just one year it just seemed kind of forced. Like I had to have it for a class. We had to meet a certain amount of time. And it was just kind of awkward for like a semester, of really kind of going through our like, and this might not be maybe not a lot of people's experience at all, because this was seminary, and it was for school, but it's like we had, a kind of a criteria or a whole outline, like that kind of stuff. And I think the stage where I was at, it felt forced. And that was on me, that it felt more force than anything. So it was more of like a check it off. I did my mentoring. So I think that was a part of my life where maybe the mentoring experience wasn't as fruitful as I think it could have been. And again, I think that was me and my attitude going into it of like, oh, I don't have a mentor right now, but I got to find one for this class and done. And that mentoring relationship ended after that class. And it was just it was weird. Does anybody else have any like weird, bad experiences with mentoring, or what could be a bad experience?
Well, you were just talking. I thought it just made me think. I was previously thinking, I don't think I had any formal mentorships in my life. But as you were talking, I realized when I was in high school, I lived in a really small town. So the town had a youth pastor, like all the churches pooled, and we had one youth pastor for the town. But they had decided they called it leadership something, I don't even know, but I realized it was actually just mentorship. Like they were choosing to intentionally mentor a small group of us. And you would think that would have been really not great, but it actually ended up being really a great time that really challenged and pushed me in my faith. And I don't know, it wasn't something I was looking for, but it was definitely something that we already had a relationship because they were our youth leaders and we were really involved. They also were like the directors of a summer camp. So there was a lot of overlap and a lot of relationship there. And then they just kind of made it more of the official mentorship. So maybe a little bit weird, but it was really, really powerful in my life. So,
and I'm going to turn a corner just because I know we're running out of time and say this. Why don't we ditch the language of mentoring? Just for now, because I think it's too loaded and it's too weird. And the word mentee sounds too much like manatee. And so I'm just not interested in it. Okay. Yeah. So here's my last take on this. And this is not mine. I've heard this a million times. Back to our Paul and Timothy thing. I think everybody needs a Paul, everybody needs a Timothy, and everybody needs a Barnabas. If we want to talk those three, like, and I mean, that's kind of cheesy, but instead of saying mentor, why don't we just say everybody needs someone to pour into them? That's the Paul.
Yep.
Every Christian needs somebody pouring into them, and every Christian should have somebody they're pouring into. That's finding your Timothy. That's mentoring somebody. But just stop talking about mentor. Somebody pouring into you, you pouring into someone. And then a Barnabas is like a friend, like a peer. And so I'd say somebody that you are mutually just kind of mutually encouraging, pouring into one another, whatever that might be. But I think to myself, man, I have had seasons where I've had really good Pauls, and I've had seasons where I've had really good Timothys, and I've had seasons where I've had really good Barnabases, and you need them all. You need somebody who's going to pour into you. You need somebody that you're going to pour into, and then you need somebody that you are walking shoulder and shoulder with and just splashing on one another. And I think if we can kind of like simplify it to that, set your schedule and, pursue the mentor. Yeah, just pour into, be poured into, and then just get soaked all over the place.
Yeah, I like that language because it feels a lot less intimidating. I think a lot of times people are like, if someone was, I can't be your mentor. Like, I'm not equipped. I don't know what I would do. But yeah, pouring into someone's life, that just feels like, yeah, I can do that. Yeah,
I can pour into somebody's life. Yeah, great. Pour what in? Well, we'll talk about that another time.
Well, I think that's a good place to end. That's thank you for kind of changing up that language, because I do feel like that helps a lot. So go be a Paul, go be a Timothy, go be a Barnabas to somebody. Thanks, church, for listening. Thank you guys for this dialogue, and we'll see you next time.